In this section, we will be discussing encroachment, false starts, disconcerting acts, motion, and shifts. A shift is defined as the action of one or more offensive players who, after leaving the huddle or taking a set position, who move to a new set position before the snap. Any team coming from a huddle is considered to be shifting when coming to their line of scrimmage for their positions. In order for a shift to be complete, all players must be set for a full second before either the snap occurs or before another player goes into motion. We need to be aware of all players coming set before motion happens, especially being mindful of players who are going out wide. Also, keep in mind that if an official is talking to a player to get them into proper positioning, we shouldn't penalize a team for a player complying with our requests. Quarterbacks must also follow the rules on shifts. A quarterback who goes under center to receive a snap is considered to be in motion, and if he is not set 1 second before the ball is snapped, he has committed an illegal shift. Oftentimes we see this when a quarterback is attempting a quarterback sneak and is trying to get a quick snap to catch the defense off guard. He is also not allowed to move his foot forward or make any other forward movement without being set. However, he is allowed to raise and lower a foot to put a teammate in motion or call for a snap without being penalized. If a quarterback is making an exaggerated step forward right before the snap, we should use preventive officiating to tell the quarterback to make sure he knows he should simply be lifting his foot upward to call for a snap. Remember, we want to make sure we're not nitpicking here. So if he lifts his foot and it comes down an inch or two forward, we probably don't want to call this. This is a game interrupting foul, and the team does not gain an advantage not intended by the rules. An illegal shift is a foul at the snap, and the play should be allowed to continue. It is enforced 5 yards from the previous spot. Motion is one offensive player who is moving not towards the line of scrimmage, meaning either parallel or backwards from the line of scrimmage at the snap. Keep in mind, a player could move forward and then turn to go parallel as long as at the snap he is not moving forward. An example of this might be a running back who is lined up 7 yards deep, who goes 3 yards forward while turning to go parallel. Motion should not be used to try to draw the defense into the neutral zone, so his motion shouldn't be suddenly towards the line of scrimmage before turning and moving parallel or backwards. If he does move suddenly forward and it draws the defense into the neutral zone, we probably have a false start here. A player who is clearly not in the backfield, either a player who is on the line of scrimmage or who is in no man's land, must do one of the following to be considered to be legally in motion. A, he comes off the line of scrimmage and is set in the backfield for 1 full second before going into motion, or B, he is at least 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage when the ball is snapped. We want to be careful here as well to make sure that the motion isn't used to draw the defense into the neutral zone. The responsibility for calling illegal motion falls on the wing opposite of the direction of motion. If the player does change his direction back, the same official should still follow him. If needed, take a half step back from the line of scrimmage to ensure a good line of sight on the motion player. This foul occurs at the snap, and the penalty is 5 yards from the previous spot. A false start is an action by the offense that simulates the ball coming into play. This can be caused by a sudden shift or feigned charge before the snap. For example, a back moving up suddenly towards the line of scrimmage during a cadence. Also, any acts that are solely intended to draw the defense into the neutral zone are considered to be a false start. The classic example is the old Dallas Cowboys movement of the linemen going from a 2-point stance straight up and then down to a 3-point stance. Something like this used randomly in a game should be called a false start. Down and distance shouldn't be a determining factor in our calls, but we should be alert to something like this on 3rd or 4th downs with less than 5 yards to the line to gain. Players in different positions on the offense can affect what is considered to be a false start. Interior linemen probably have the least leeway when dealing with false starts. While linemen don't have to be completely still, sudden movements are false starts. Normal actions that are not sudden in nature, such as pointing out blocking assignments, are perfectly legal. Also, an interior lineman, any player that is between the snapper and another player on the line of scrimmage, cannot lift their hand once they place it on the ground. Often we see linemen who might bounce a little bit up and down. This should be ignored as long as it's subtle and not causing any confusion on the defensive side of the ball. Another thing to consider may be a lineman who turns his head to look at the quarterback who's audibling. As long as it's not sudden and confusing, it should be legal. Remember, we are looking for things that are trying to simulate a ball being snapped. Ends have a little more freedom than interior linemen. A tight end who has his hand on the ground is allowed to lift it, provided it's not in a sudden motion. He can also back off the line, get set, and go into motion again. Again, the key here is to make sure it's not done in a way intended to draw the defense into the neutral zone. Another thing to keep in mind here, if an end does come off the line of scrimmage, we need to make sure that the offense still only has 4 players in the backfield at the snap. Watch and make sure that if an end comes off and another player steps up to the line of scrimmage, that they are both set for 1 second before the snap or anyone else going into motion. Backs have the most freedom when it comes to false starts. They are allowed to lift their hands from the ground. They also can step forward to readjust their position or go into motion. Again, the key here is making sure that it is not sudden. There can be some gray area between a back who might be readjusting and one who has missed the cadence and still thinks the ball is about to be snapped. Other things we need to consider for false starts is that any quick movements that simulate a snap should be called as a false start. One example might be a quarterback who is under center and pulls up suddenly to audible. 2 players quickly going into a shift might also be considered a false start foul. Be alert to players who have been doing something all game in their pre-snap routine and then change it abruptly. A good example of this would be the lineman who's been bouncing slightly all game and then on a play has a much more abrupt movement. Sometimes we have to determine if an offensive player's movement caused a defensive player to enter the neutral zone, or if the defensive player moved in a way to cause the offensive player to react. In these bang-bang decisions, we need to come together to discuss it as a crew. Don't signal your foul too quickly. Let's make sure that someone else who might have thrown a flag has the same thing as you. It will look bad if an official comes in signaling encroachment, while another official might have had a different look and seen that the offensive player made a movement that caused the defensive player to encroach. Wings also need to be sure that they are working their side of the snapper. It doesn't look good if you call a false start on the end opposite of you, if your partner doesn't throw the flag. Trust your crew. Only in instances where it is a crew saver should this be done. False starts are always dead ball fouls and should be killed immediately. The penalty is 5 yards from the previous spot. Encroachment is one of the biggest differences between high school and college or NFL football. We need to make sure we are enforcing NFHS rules here and not confusing it with football from Saturday or Sunday. Encroachment is when a player is illegally in the neutral zone between the time the ball is marked ready for play until the snap. Offensive and defensive encroachment has different elements between them. The offense cannot be in the neutral zone once the ball is ready for play and the snapper has touched the ball. Watch for linemen's head as they line up to make sure that it hasn't entered the neutral zone. It might be a little hard to determine if a player who is split out wide of the formation is in the neutral zone. Use common sense here, especially as they come up to the line of scrimmage. Most players at the varsity level should be communicating with the wing on their side as to if they are on or off the line of scrimmage. If they are looking at you while lining up, help make sure they aren't in the neutral zone and back them up if they are. However, if the player is obviously in the neutral zone and not responding to your attempt to back them up, then flag it. The defense has 2 different intervals in which encroachment looks different. The first is once the ball is marked ready for play and before the snapper has put his hands on the ball. At this point, the defense can be in the neutral zone but cannot touch the ball or an opponent. He also cannot give defensive signals while in the neutral zone. Once the snapper has placed his hands on the ball, they cannot be in the neutral zone for any reason. Using preventive officiating with encroachment can be very helpful to make a game run smooth and not have to deal with a ton of flags. A defensive lineman who is very close to the neutral zone should be told by an official to back up a little bit between plays, just to let him know that we see him. Hopefully this will cause the player to be more aware of his positioning as he lines up. When dealing with substitutes coming onto the field of play, he can never be considered to be encroaching until he has reached his side of the line of scrimmage. Up until that point, he is still a substitute, and we will cover this more in detail later. Same with the player being replaced. The biggest difference in high school and NCAA and NFL rules is that encroachment is always a dead ball foul in high school. We need to kill this before the snap. The offense should never be allowed to snap the ball if a player from either team is encroaching. A defensive player cannot enter the neutral zone and then back up before the snap. Once he crosses that line, he is encroached. Be aware of what happens first, particularly when a defensive player enters the neutral zone and an offensive player flinches. Be slow to signal and communicate as a crew. Encroachment is a 5-yard penalty from the previous spot. Wings running the chains also need to be aware of where the ball is in relation to the line to gain. When it is close to 5 yards from it, we need to check where we have the ball marked compared to the tape on the chains. Part of the pregame routine for linemen should be to make sure that there is an easy-to-see tape on the chains exactly in the middle. If the ball is beyond the tape, it is good to tell your referee 5 will get you 1, so that he knows if the defense encroaches, we will have a first down. Or, if it is short, tell him it's short. Good communication here will make games run a lot smoother. Finally, the last thing we need to be conscious before the snap is the defense committing disconcerting acts or words. The defense cannot do anything that is similar to the offensive cadence that could cause the ball to be snapped or lead to a false start. Words that sound similar to the quarterback's call for the ball is considered disconcerting. Even if they are trying to signal a defensive call, it must be different enough from the offensive call for the ball that there is no confusion. For example, a defense cannot use a call like mutt to signal a change in the defense if the offense uses hut to signal the snap. They also cannot clap in a similar manner to the quarterback if that is what he uses in his cadence. This isn't to say that clapping in and of itself is illegal, but it cannot be used to try to cause the offense to false start. Stomping in front of a center could also be considered disconcerting because it can interfere with the snapper's ability to hear the cadence. Finally, a defensive player who runs up to the line of scrimmage while trying to draw them into a false start is illegal. Sometimes a player may try to time the snap, which is legal, but keep an eye out for players who are consistently doing this but not actually timing the snap. This can be a tricky one, but preventive officiating will tell us to talk to the player and make sure he understands that he could be called for disconcerting acts if he continues to do so. The umpire is in the best position to hear or see these actions and will probably have the best chance to call this foul. Disconcerting acts are a dead ball foul, and the ball should not be allowed to be put into play if it is called. It is a 5-yard penalty from the previous spot. When we are dealing in the gray area, here are a couple of things to remember to keep us from becoming flag happy in close situations. If after a shift we are not 100% sure if the players have been set for 1 second, then we should consider it to be a legal shift. If it is borderline, if a player in motion is going parallel or towards his line of scrimmage, then we should consider it legal motion. We want to make sure that the player is definitely gaining advantage when we call this. Finally, if we aren't sure if the defense is committing a disconcerting act, we should consider the signals legal. However, it is not bad practice to discuss this with the players and coaches to make sure they understand the rule. Again, keep in mind that we must make sure we enforce the NFHS rules. Getting them confused with higher levels of play will cause issues. Be confident of your rule differences by being in your rule book. I also highly recommend using the Reading Study Guide to Football NFHS edition. The 2025 edition should be released towards the end of May, but can be pre-ordered on penaltycard.com.